We are in this mad race where everybody's got a new model every week.
So it kind of feels that everyone is just racing towards AGI. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
You know, it's got a lot of upsides, of course, but it is dangerous at the same time. We saw that with the autonomous weapons argument back in February.
Not many people know unless they read your book or are insiders, but it was a moment when Demis has received a commitment from Reid Hoffman to make DeepMind independent again. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
There's this back and forth, secret back and forth, called Project Mario. And all of this was completely secret. I discovered about this during my research. I interviewed all these people. They gave me lots of internal documents which laid out exactly what happened. And DeepMind really didn't like it. And so at one point I had to get on a Zoom call with DeepMind general counsel, who said, look, you're not allowed to write this. And I'm like, of course I can write it. You know, you may be angry with the people who leaked it, but I've got the information. It's all true. So, sorry, I'm going to write it.
Everyone listening and everyone watching should go and grab a copy. It kind of seems that you're the right person at the right time. It was like with the Power Law book. It is now with Superintelligence.
So when I first went to see Demis, right after ChatGPT went viral, I remember walking into his office and saying, hey, you know, how are you feeling? I mean, you know, you used to be the world leader in AI. Now OpenAI has done ChatGPT. It's kind of overtaken you. You must feel terrible. And he's like, yeah, they parked the tanks on my lawn. This is war, Sebastian.
This is incredible. This is like
Game of Thrones for AI.
Absolutely. And also, you interviewed Sam Altman, you interviewed Hassabis, you've interviewed Ilya. These are three very different people building the same thing. Who should we trust with superintelligence? For 3 years, you had access to Demis and about 100 people around his entourage for your last book. A little bit about Demis. He's a chess master by age 6, coding video games as a teenager, turns down a 7-figure offer to go study at Cambridge instead, and then he casually tells you that Newton ultimately failed. Before we get into DeepMind and the AI race, can you paint a portrait for us? Who is this person when the cameras are off? Do you remember the first meeting with him?
Yeah, well, I met him in the mid-2010s, you know, at tech conferences in Europe. And the striking thing about him was that his affect, his manner, was sort of like the guy next door, kind of super approachable, normal, you know, not wearing anything particularly flashy, sort of a round neck sweater, and just sort of like a really normal guy. And then he would get on the stage, and what came out of his mouth was the opposite of normal, right? He was going from neuroscience to computer science to theoretical physics to sort of biology and philosophy. The range of his intellect was just stunning. And yet he always expressed it as if he was just saying, hey, after we finish lunch, why don't we just wash up the dishes, then we'll go for a walk. It was like completely normal. So that was the thing that first struck me. And then I really got to know him when we started doing the proper interviews for the book. I pitched him in 2022 in November, and by a stroke of good luck, this was just a week before ChatGPT came out. So the subject of AI went from the fringe to the mainstream way faster than I expected. And then armed with that good luck, through all this period of the large language model race, I was talking to him. And the more I talked to him, you know, the more amazed I was by just the sort of the depth and range of his thinking, notably the spiritual side. I didn't expect that at all. Like, this is a guy whose intense curiosity about science is so passionate that he expresses it as if he's, you know, this is about getting closer to God. If you understand nature better, you're getting closer to God. And he invokes this idea, the God of Spinoza, Spinoza being the, you know, 17th century philosopher. And this is, you know, something that Spinoza would say, that the study of nature is a way of approaching the divine intelligence that created nature.
It kind of seems to me that this is a person that from childhood had this existential questions, or he would be very curious about nature and how reality works. And then he kept on reading and asking himself, how does reality work? And being and having this incredible mind from a young age to be able to go and search and read and learn more about these topics.
Yeah, that's right. He is a classic autodidact. When he was young, his chess brilliance set him apart from all the other kids in his school. He would sometimes drop out for an entire year and just skip school and learn what he needed to learn in his bedroom, but really, focus on chess. And so I think when somebody is leading their own life from a young age of, 9 or 10, they often come up with pretty distinctive ideas because they're not influenced by the mainstream. And that explains Demis's super early conviction, even when he was 17, that his mission in life was to build powerful artificial intelligence so that he could unravel the mysteries of science, penetrate the fabric of reality, and outdo Isaac Newton, who, as you say, he viewed as a failure.
And I was wondering, how much do you think him being born in a family of modest means gave him a chip on the shoulder to want to prove himself?
He is, in his manner, the least chip on the shoulder person I've ever met. He is super comfortable in his skin, honest about what his motivations are. I mean, it just all comes out. When you sit there, we would meet in a pub in London near his home, and we would go up. There was like a secret staircase at the back. You go upstairs. There was this room, a bit dusty, where nobody else was there, and we'd order a cappuccino and some water, and we would, just talk. And you kind of forget the surroundings as you get immersed in the conversation. And he just will say things like, I identified with this particular science fiction hero, and there's this guy called Ender who saves all of humanity by being a science fiction genius at, playing video games, and he applies that to killing all the space aliens. It's like, dude, are you saying you're saving all of humanity? Are you saying that you're Messiah here? I mean, why would you tell the writer that, even if you thought that, why would you say that? And Demis is so comfortable in his skin that he just says it how it is, how he feels. It just comes out. So I think the story that he has a chip on his shoulder is wrong. I do think, on the other hand, that it's amusing for me to go to Silicon Valley and point out to people over there, hey, you think you've got the melting pot with people from immigrant backgrounds who found companies. Well, we have that in London too, actually. This guy, Chinese Singaporean mother, a father of Greek Cypriot heritage, classic melting pot story. And, his co-founder, Mustafa Suleyman, came from a Syrian cab driver father and all that. So the melting pot immigrant story is alive and well in London.
And also you have this prodigious kid that could skip a couple of years with school. He was doing so well in chess. Cambridge actually told him to wait a year because he was too young. But if we zoom into his first fundraise, with DeepMind, he actually struggled. Even though he had the entrepreneurial experience, also I was a VC, so he had everything that, previous entrepreneurial experience, prodigious child, really good, but he really struggled to fundraise his first round. In the end, he kind of gave almost half his company to Founders Fund. Why do you think is that?
Because he was pitching a technology that really didn't exist, right? This is 2010. Yeah, and even normal AI. I mean, in 2010, it was still the AI winter. We were 2 years before the ImageNet competition when AI first was able to recognize the photograph of a cat. AI couldn't recognize a cat, couldn't do anything. So there's this guy saying, hey, I'm going to build AGI and I'd like some money. And, the answer was, yes, but what's the product? And he would say, forget the product. I mean, this is going to be so powerful. You won't even think about products. It's just going to knock your socks off. And it took a special kind of investor to be so contrarian as to back that. And I guess the funny thing about Peter Thiel is he is very contrarian, and so he liked the pitch. But then the moment when AI started to work around 2013, he actually got bored of the pitch. And, that's why DeepMind had to sell itself to Google, because it couldn't continue to raise money from Founders Fund.
Yeah, I kind of see this like through the book that he always care about the big problems. You know, you also see it with AlphaGo, with AlphaFold in particular, and he strikes me through your writing as a great thinker that thinks about the biggest problems of the universe and has this great vision, but maybe doesn't care that much about the business side. You know, we need to make products, we need to make money. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, it's true that he's a massive big thinker. I mean, this is what made him so fun to write about. You know, how often do you get to spend more than 30 hours in the pub with this person who does think from, you know, theoretical physics to neuroscience to biology to philosophy and can riff on the history of movies. I mean, it's amazing, right? And I think that is actually worth just, you know, double clicking on because, of course, the stereotypical Silicon Valley entrepreneur probably dropped out of Stanford after a year and didn't get a degree, let alone get a PhD, as Demis did, let alone get a Nobel Prize, as Demis did. So we're talking a very different kind of cat. And just super, super interesting to just understand the range of his thinking. Now, on the product side, it's a bit more nuanced than that because I think most sophisticated, amazing individuals have two or three individuals inside them, and they're kind of competing and struggling to get out. And with Demis, there is the Nobel Prize scientist and the person who's so curious about understanding the fabric of reality. But then there's also just a very competitive guy who wants to win stuff and who shipped product when he did his first company, which was a video game design company. And, you know, actually does care about product and design and just winning. So when I first went to see Demis, right after ChatGPT went viral, I remember walking into his office and saying, "Hey, you know, how are you feeling? I mean, you know, you used to be the world leader in AI. Now OpenAI has done ChatGPT. It's kind of overtaken you. You must feel terrible. I mean, gee, that's got to suck." And he's like, "Yeah, they parked the tanks on my lawn. This is war, Sebastian." So that's how he framed it. You know, war with tanks, competitive. I'm going to kill them. I mean, it was super competitive. And so I think, you know, before we, you know, simply characterize him as the scientist who doesn't care about products, no, there is actually another side to him that is passionate about winning a product race.
And you mentioned that Peter Thiel is a contrarian, and usually he backs when things are not obvious. And also famously, you know, they declined to do the Series C because he was afraid, okay, now it's obvious, now it works, now everyone is going to invest in AI, now it's a bubble. You've talked with all the AI luminaries while writing this book. Like, what do you think? Is it like an AI bubble, or is it the way that Demis kind of said it, and I'm paraphrasing here, is like AI is just the same way that how humanity got their prefrontal cortex and is going to change everything?
Yeah, look, I think that there's a specific bubble in certain companies which are just over their skis. You know, the capital costs are so extraordinary that although they have an A-plus technology, I do think it's like, you know, a new prefrontal cortex. So it's an A-plus technology, but it can be an F-minus business model. And I think if you look at OpenAI, which is building a foundation model that is kind of commoditized because it's competing with a bunch of other good foundation models. It's good, but it's not like exceptionally good. And it's targeted this product at the consumer market, not the enterprise market. And consumers don't want to pay. So like they have enormous numbers of users, like 900 million, but only 5% pay any money to them, right? So I just think in that case, there is a specific mismatch between the enormous cost of CapEx and the very distant prospect of serious revenues. And so I've written publicly 3 months ago that, you know, OpenAI has a 50% chance of failing by the middle of next year. And I still believe that. And in fact, OpenAI-linked stocks are down today because, you know, there was a Wall Street Journal piece about how they didn't meet their targets. And I think, you know, there can be specific companies that are in trouble. But if you look at the sector overall, look, I think it's just going to be massively powerful, productive, disruptive, for good and for bad. I think the demand for token generation is just going to grow and grow. I don't think the semiconductor sector is overvalued, even though it's up by some insane amount in the last 3 months. So I would be long the kind of semiconductor hardware stack, including maybe ASML. I would be worried about OpenAI. And I think the application layer is just super speculative. We have no idea which of these AI-driven applications will really get product market fit. So that's a classic Series A venture thing where it's okay to do it as long as you recognize that 8 out of 10 bets are going to go south.
Yeah, I think it was like one of the founders of Altimeter, and they invested both in OpenAI and Anthropic. And to your point, like OpenAI, has all the consumers, whereas like Anthropic is much more like enterprise heavy. And they just added in the last 2-3 months, I don't know how many billions in revenue. And he said, look, if you look at any type of measurement from a market size, as you used to measure software before, it doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't make sense because AI now doesn't take only the market for software, it takes the market for jobs. So there are some jobs that can be done with AI, which is just incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think we haven't seen yet in the data that there's genuine displacement of human workers by machines. But anecdotally, I seriously believe it's coming, and there will be big displacement. And I think actually society ought to be more worried about that. And there are various policy interventions like a robot tax. So it's not really fair that if you hire a human worker, you have to pay all kinds of taxes, right? Payroll taxes on the worker pays income taxes, there's all this tax burden. The robot doesn't pay income tax, the robot doesn't have payroll taxes. So that's distorting the playing field in favor of substituting away from human labor. I think there are various policy fixes like that one, which we should all be thinking about.
Absolutely. I mean, like this is the first time in history where GDP is not correlated with labor, right? So that's something that we'll have to think in quite deeply and see like how we solve it. And Hassabis has a strong social democratic values. He views Britain as more egalitarian. He stayed in London, and now he's like famously now he is the boss for Google AI. So they didn't give it to Jeff Dean, but they gave it to Hassabis. And then he didn't want to move to California. Was that an ideological choice or a strategic one? And how did it shape what DeepMind became?
Yeah, I've debated this a bit with Demis in that pub. His official story is that he had a strategic business reason for staying in London, which was there's a lot of scientific talent in Europe. And so if you wanted to, hire that talent at a reasonable price, London was the smart place to be. If you went to Silicon Valley, there would be the mother of all competitions for talent. You'd pay through the nose, etc., etc. Now, I don't fully buy that story because actually, if you look at who came in terms of the PhDs who were hired early on into DeepMind, it was really a global market for talent. It wasn't a London market or even a European talent. I mean, there were some people who came from Switzerland who did PhDs in Switzerland, like Dan Wiester and indeed Shane Legg, the co-founder with Demis. There were some who came from New York, like Koray Kavukoglu, who was very important early hire and became head of research pretty quickly. There was Vlad Nee, who was Canadian-Ukrainian, did a PhD in Canada. David Silver was British, okay, but he was a global figure. He'd done his PhD in Canada as well. So it doesn't feel to me like this was really a local hiring story. And I actually think that the real story is that Demis is patriotically British. He likes the social democratic values of Britain and of Europe. He likes the fact that when you walk to the office from King's Cross Tube Station in London, you go through this fun square where there's a fountain bubbling out of the cobblestones with 3-year-olds running around with bare feet in the summer. And it's kind of like this free space for kids to have fun. There are free movies along the canal right by that square. You go a little bit further, and right by the DeepMind office, there's a green space where kids from the local government housing can play soccer. This is, find me that public space on Sandhill Road. It doesn't exist, right? And so I think, there's something about the values of Europe and of Britain that Demis really likes.
I'm very happy that he stayed, and he had the power both intellectually and also to negotiate with Google for him to stay and to create this high talent density in London, and to put, like London, Britain, and Europe more seriously on the map when it comes to technology.
Totally. I mean, King's Cross, where DeepMind is based, is a fantastic place. And of course, you can get the train from King's Cross either to Cambridge, takes you about an hour, or you can go to Paris. The other direction might take you 2.5 hours on the Eurostar. It's a pretty connected hub now. And when you look at the traffic in Silicon Valley, right, you want to go to San Francisco to Menlo Park. Depending on the time of day, that could take you an hour. So I think actually we have a joined up tech hub. It's interesting that Jeff Bezos is doing a new AI company, and he's looking at opening an office in King's Cross. It's interesting that DeepMind's chief reinforcement learning scientist, David Silver, who I spent a lot of time with for this book, has spun out now. He has a brand new $5 billion valuation AI lab based in Britain. So things are really happening in Europe. And I always say to people, look, in Europe, the macro may be a bit worrying, right? Too much sovereign debt, too much regulation, not really a deep enough single market in the European Union. There are big macro problems in Europe. But on the micro, when I go to tech conferences, I meet third-time founders. I see lots of activity. The venture ecosystem is strong. A lot of people have had experience in Silicon Valley. They totally get that DNA. I think, Europe's kicking butt. I think it's really going places on the tech side.
Absolutely. And I mean, also you said it in your previous book that the next decade is Europe's decade when it comes to tech.
I still believe that.
Love that. And also you mentioned the reinforcement learning, from David Silver. I mean, DeepMind's thesis in the beginning was reinforcement learning and the scientific AI. So the focus on scientific AI, they proved that with AlphaGo, AlphaZero, and AlphaFold. They were not big believers in just scaling up language models as Ilya did. Then OpenAI released ChatGPT and the world kind of shifted overnight. And then he considered his competitors less serious about science a bit. Is that confidence or arrogance? What do you think in that particular period of time was?
Look, I think there's two things going on here. One is that, as you say, Demis was focused on science. And so if we think about the chronology, in 2020, which is the year when GPT-3 came out from OpenAI, that was the first of the GPTs that was really impressive. So the same year, what was DeepMind doing? Well, it was focusing on AlphaFold, which produced this protein folding prediction system at the end of 2020. And that's what won Demis and one of his colleagues a Nobel Prize in chemistry. And it's also unlocked, lots of advances in medicine, drug discovery. I was talking to the co-founder of BioNTech, the biotech company, last night. And she was telling me that, that really the molecule discovery part of the drug discovery process has 10x'd in terms of its speed since AlphaFold. And people use it the whole time. And so, yes, the clinical trial part still takes as long as it ever did. So, we're a long way from actually having drugs. But the pure science part has been accelerated a lot. So that's amazing. And so, yes, Demis believes in all that. He believes in it more than his competitors. I think, there's a bit of catching up going on in OpenAI and Anthropic. They are also now turning their attention to this stuff. But Demis was clearly there first and in a bigger way. But then the other thing happening when you mentioned the ChatGPT release is simply that, led by science, actually, by neuroscience specifically, Demis simply made a wrong call about the path to AGI, right? He believed, based on his neuroscience training, he did a PhD in neuroscience, that, language as a system of symbols it can get you some way to strong intelligence, but ultimately a strong intelligence needs to be grounded in the real world like a human being is. So we learn partly just by acting in the world and getting feedback from the environment. And by the way, of course, this is coming back today. People are talking about world models, simulation of real world. We need that for robotics. So Demis wasn't wrong about the importance of real world grounding, but he was kind of, as often happens with technology, he was early, or just like he got the timing of this conviction inconveniently wrong, right? Because it turned out that just by leveraging language in a large language model, you could make astonishing progress towards AGI. And that's what OpenAI proved. And that's what Ilya Sutskever, the chief scientist at OpenAI, understood from the moment, the very day that the Transformer paper came out in 2017, which unlocked the modeling of scientific, of data sequences. And I tell this story, in my book where, Ilya is sitting there in his chair, the Transformer paper has just dropped. He reads it and he literally jumps out of his chair with excitement. He understands instantly that this is the unlock for a problem that he's been thinking about ever since his PhD, which is how do you successfully model sequences? And he runs down the corridor, finds his collaborator, Alec Radford, says, Alec, whatever you're doing, drop it. We're going to do this. We're going to build a large language model. We're going to do it with a transformer architecture, and we're going to do it with language. It's going to be awesome. And so I'm like picturing this poor guy, Alec Radford, the engineer, sort of very talented young guy, but, less of an explosive firebrand than Ilya Sutskever. And he's doing whatever he's doing, right? He's nerding out on his, highly intelligent research, and this kind of caffeinated charismatic pretty much jumps on his head and says, drop it, you're going to do this. And I think, that shows the value of a prepared mind, that, Ilya was waiting for this because his whole PhD training had made him look out for the unlock in modeling sequential data. Whereas, Demis had a different PhD in neuroscience, and it had trained him to be suspicious of language. And so the paths diverged.
It kind of seems, if I understood correctly, the evolution of AI models and large language models and transformers is that in the end, it doesn't really matter what type of data you take. As long as you have a big data set and you take it through transformers, then also you will get some surprising results. And my understanding is this is the same system that they use for AlphaFold. Whereas like Demis kind of believed that, hey, how can you, you can only train, if you train on existing data, how can you discover new things? But it kind of seems that in the interconnection of the data, which is also what happened in the AlphaFold, what if we look at the amino acids, and if we don't understand it, but if we have enough data, this is how they could bring it to the 90 or 92% discoverability for the protein, how it unfolds, which is just amazing. You just have like this transformers, and it started with large language models, but it kind of seems that it's applicable wherever you kind of put it if you have enough data.
Yeah. I mean, look, I agree with that with one caveat, which is that I think the person within DeepMind who really deeply believed that, it's important to learn through reinforcement learning and from experience was David Silver. So David was, Demis's close friend at Cambridge. They did the first startup, the video game design company, together. Then David had a nervous breakdown because working with Demis can be very intense. So he told me he had to take a year off and sort of chill in France, and just kind of get his head back. And then to kind of complete his recovery, he relaxed by doing a PhD in reinforcement learning in Canada. But so that's David's backstory. And he's the one who really, really believes seriously that if it's not reinforcement learning, it's a very limited project, And I think, his new startup, Ineffable, is all about pushing reinforcement learning to take AI to the next level. Demis, I would say, is more sort of open-minded, like he believes in deep learning and he believes in reinforcement learning. And so it wasn't that he was quite as hard over on RL only, as you just said. But it's still fair to say that there was this irony that when it came to the AlphaFold model, they did use a transformer architecture, a kind of special one, which they adapted to read data involved in structural biology. But, they didn't do the same with such gusto so early when it came to language.
Yeah, and I can definitely see, based on my understanding of Demis from your writing, that he, he would like to use whatever type of technology he has or the frontier technology, but to solve real problems. Like for him, building a consumer app, was never kind of top of the list. Oh my God, like this is what I wake up in the morning and I'm going to the office to build like the best consumer app. But he would be much more, okay, let's try to use the best technology, but for AlphaFold or, next big problems in health or in science. And also...
Sorry, I would say that's right. But one of the fun things about writing about Demis is that he's so complicated. Like I said before, there are 2 or 3 personalities inside him. So on the one hand, he's passionate about science, passionate about finding a root node problem, meaning one that if you unlock this root node, all sorts of other discoveries will follow. And so there is that side to him. On the other hand, he's quite pragmatic and practical. And, if the next job that requires to be done is to build a consumer app, he will max the heck out of that thing. He will fight to beat OpenAI. He will compete. Once I went to see him and he said, Sebastian, when I was at Cambridge, I was the best table football, football player in the whole of the university. And I'm like, so what? Who cares? And no, this is serious. I was absolutely the best. You don't believe me, but I was the best. And I've watched videos, Sebastian. I've gone online. I've watched YouTube videos of professional football players, and they don't know the snake shot, right? Where you kind of twist your arm around the lever, and then you get extra friction on the lever as you pull your arm up. And that's how you get the snake shot. And these professionals don't know that. Now, I knew it when I was at Cambridge, and I was the best. It's like, okay. So it's just the level of competition, right, is off the charts. And so I'm just fascinated by this person who is extreme in multiple directions. Extreme about science, extreme about winning, just so fascinated and curious about everything in life. I don't know what I'm going to do next, actually. That's the problem. Who can I write about next who will be as fascinating as Demis Hassabis?
Only if you look at the type of games that he can play, right? Like not only chess and Shiju, like the type of chess from Japan, and then he learned Go. Any type of games, he would just start and play just for the fun of learning a game and being really good at it.
I interviewed some of his early chess competitors, right, from the youth chess circuit. They would say, well, look, Demis was very good at chess. He was the best in Britain. But what's really incredible is not that. It's like he then did the 5-game Mind Sports Olympiad where he played all these other games, and he would run between the tables. He'd play a chess move on the chess game. Then he would run somewhere else and play, the move in backgammon or shogi or whatever the other game was. Then he would run back to the chessboard. And he won this thing 5 times in a row, like the global championship. Yeah, no, he's unbelievable.
Incredible. And also, not many people know unless they read your book or are insiders, but it was a moment when Demis has received a commitment from Reid Hoffman of about $1 billion from his personal money to make DeepMind independent again. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story, and how do you think the future would have been different if he would have taken those money?
Yeah, so Demis sold the company to Google in the beginning of 2014, and there was a condition in the sale that said, I'm selling it to you, Google, because you're going to have a safety oversight board on the technology. We can't just have the corporate board of Google deciding about the deployment of AGI. It's just too big an important thing. You can't have a corporate board doing this. So there needs to be like independent people, and they were dreaming of maybe Barack Obama, after he finished being president, would be on this board, and really big people like that. And so they held one meeting, and it was a disaster because they did it at SpaceX, and Elon Musk was the host of the whole meeting. And then like a few months later, Elon Musk announces he's co-founding OpenAI. So then the Google leadership is saying, this is ridiculous. We invite Elon into the tent, and instead of helping us make AI safe, he just rips off our ideas and goes and does a rival. And that's how OpenAI gets started, by the way. So then there's like no more safety oversight. But around 2016, Demis is like, wait a second, we did agree to safety and oversight. You can't just forget it totally. This AGI thing is a serious future prospect. So, I'm demanding that you do safety oversight. And Google is like, yeah, whatever. And they don't really take it that seriously. So to make them take it seriously, Demis goes to Reid Hoffman and says, would you fund a spin out where I spin out from Google and do an independent DeepMind? And Reid Hoffman says, well, yeah, I believe in, good AI, not just used for corporate benefit, but for humanity. I'm willing to put 1 billion of my personal fortune of 3.8 billion into this venture. And then they have this 1 billion promise, and they have that a bit of an implied threat to Google. Hey, if you don't give us a safety oversight, we may just quit. And then there's this back and forth, secret back and forth called Project Mario. And it goes on for 3 years with all kinds of lawyers writing big term sheets back and forth between DeepMind and Google. Demis is flying to San Francisco for 12 hours of negotiations, then flying back to run DeepMind. He's absolutely, getting exhausted. Every time the lawyers bring him a new term sheet that he's supposed to read, he's saying, I don't want this part of my brain to get bigger, because he's fed up with reading legal documents. He wants to do science. And in the end, he kind of just abandons it because it's just banging his head against the wall to get this safety oversight commission. And he never quite gets it across the line. And in fact, his co-founder, Mustafa Suleyman, who led some of these negotiations, winds up being pushed out of DeepMind because it really just didn't work, and it just creates bad vibes. And all of this was completely secret. I discovered about this during my research. I interviewed all these people. They gave me lots of internal documents which laid out exactly what happened. And DeepMind really didn't like it. And so at one point I had to get on a phone call or a Zoom call with the DeepMind general counsel, who said, look, you're not allowed to write this. And I'm like, of course I can write it. You may be angry with the people who leaked it, but I've got the information. It's all true. So sorry, I'm going to write it. And so they kind of accepted that. If you don't have to speak to the lawyers at least once during a book project, you're not doing the right thing.
Exactly. I love that. And how would you describe the drama between Elon and Larry and Demis? Because from the book, it comes across that Demis had no choice but to sell to Google to get access to the resources because Founders Fund didn't want to continue funding him. Like, do you see like another venue in which kind of Demis could pursue his pursuit of understanding nature and AGI?
There's a common refrain amongst tech people in London that says, oh, it's such a tragedy. DeepMind was a British company, then it sold itself to the Americans. So dumb, if only there'd been more ambition and they'd held on later, blah, blah, blah. That's all complete rubbish. It's just nonsense, because the truth is, Demis never lacked ambition. I mean, he had masses of ambition. The dude is like way off the charts on ambition. No, but the point is, there was no money otherwise. And, this was before the era of the Vision Fund. There was no Masso running around with, huge, great checks for crazy ideas. You literally couldn't raise money for sort of an ambitious AI lab beyond the the sort of 50 million that they managed to raise in the Series C. I don't remember the exact number, but something like that. So they needed a deep-pocketed parent. There were 3 bidders. There was Elon Musk. There was Mark Zuckerberg, that time running Facebook. And then there was Google. And Demis sort of ran an auction basically and picked Google because they had the most compute, and also because Larry Page, his father, had been an academic working on neural nets back in the day. And so Demis just felt comfortable that Larry Page believed in the science for science's sake, and that if he went to Google, not only would he get a lot of compute and a lot of resources to hire great scientists, he would also get a lot of latitude to do his own thing and be independent.
Absolutely. And I was just curious because from the media, like what you sometimes hear, you get this negative impression that, Demis is this evil genius. Like, when in the journey does Demis become the evil genius, you think? Because, he come across very personable, very humble. Also, like in your epilogue, like when you try to push, like, hey, tell me, what else did you buy, with all the hundreds of millions that you have? And he's like, oh, I got a Liverpool, session for the whole year, which is 5K. Like, where do you think like this image of him kind of comes from?
Well, it shows you that when you have a super powerful technology like AI, there are going to be really vicious fights to control it, and people are going to call each other names. And so what happened specifically was that, Elon Musk really wanted to buy DeepMind. He had put $5 million into the Series B for DeepMind, and he really wanted to buy the whole thing. And Demis said no. There was this wild phone call, like in the middle of the night, where Elon suddenly said to his friend Luke Nozek, who was the Founders Fund investor on the board of DeepMind, the two of them cooked up this plan. They were at a party in LA, and they said, what's the most important thing in the world? And they said, well, it's the control of AI. Who's got the AI? Demis has got the AI. What's Demis about to do with it? He's going to sell it to Google. We've got to stop that, they said, because that's corporate control of AI. That's no good. So then they go upstairs at this party in LA, and they go into apparently a clothes closet. And Luke Nozek has got a laptop, and Elon Musk has got his wife, Tallulah Riley. And they sit in this, clothes closet, and they Skype Demis in the middle of the night in London. They say, you've got to sell it to us, not to Google. Google's evil. And Demis is like, what are you talking about? Google's got all the compute. You guys don't have the compute. I'm selling to Google. And so then Elon is massively angry. And, he goes around saying that Demis is an evil genius. And he gets this phrase because there was a video game called Evil Genius that Demis had helped to code back in the day when he was into video game design. This was like when he was 22 or something. And so, Elon picks this up and say, don't trust that guy Demis, he's an evil genius. But trust me, I'm Elon, I'm good, and I'm doing this other company, OpenAI. It's going to be super ethical and not corporate at all, right? So how long did that last, right? That's the question.
Wow, this is incredible. This is like...
Yeah, it's Game of Thrones for AI.
Absolutely. And also, you interviewed Sam Altman, you interviewed Hassabis, you've interviewed Ilya. These are three very different people building the same thing. Who should we trust with superintelligence?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think when you look at all of the early people, to be honest, they said the right things at the beginning. They all said, we're doing this because we take safety very seriously, and it's important to do it in a way that's good for humanity. And that was true of Sam Altman, that was true of Elon, that was true of Demis, that was true of Ilya. It was true, by the way, also of Dario Amodei when he founded Anthropic. The only one who didn't really say that was Mark Zuckerberg. I think he thought it would be good, humanity, whatever. It would be good for Facebook. It was his view. But then as you go forward in time, you observe how these people actually function when it comes to the crunch. And I would say that with Sam Altman, he's demonstrated that when the non-profit board decides that he's not trustworthy and he shouldn't have his finger on the button, and they fire him, he fights back and he gets himself reinstated. He fires the non-profit board, or most of it, and he turns the whole thing into a for-profit company. And then when Anthropic tries to put down some red lines about safety for autonomous weapons with AI just a few months ago in 2026. What does OpenAI do? It doesn't support the red lines. It just runs in and says to the Pentagon, well, if you'd like some AI to do your weapon stuff, we've got some here. Why don't you take ours? So I think Sam Altman has shown himself repeatedly to be really more focused on just winning and not so focused on safety. Elon is this wild mixture of, super concerned about doom scenarios, but also super concerned about just building it as fast as he possibly can and being the dominant person. And I think, again, his revealed personality is that, he's just so keen to boost his own image, be out there. There was this famous story about when he bought Twitter and he posted something on Twitter, then called X, I guess. And he was really angry because President Joe Biden had posted something from the same event, the Super Bowl, and got more likes than he did. So then Elon goes wild and says to the engineers, you got to fix that. There's a problem in the system. Why does this guy, the president, get more likes than I did? So they have to go into the algorithm and basically have a message saying, if Elon posts something, you just got to 10x it. So I think that tells us something about whether Elon is the right guy to have his finger on the button. And then you've got, Dario and Demis, who I think in their own ways are both very sincere and good about safety. And they have a very different style. Dario does his safety arguments in public. And we've seen that with the launch of Mythos recently. We saw that with the autonomous weapons argument back in February. Demis is very much behind the scenes with his safety work. All the stuff in my book I have about his pushes for safety, as I say, he didn't tell me those. I got them from other sources. And then his lawyer tried to tell me to suppress some of it. So he doesn't want to be public with his safety stuff, but he does do it behind the scenes.
Wonderful. Yeah, because also in the book, you find the comparables that he makes with CERN, right? And he says that you should have an outside supervisory board and everyone should come together and should collaborate. An incredible book. Again, I recommend everyone to go and pick up a copy. Also, it kind of feels that we're in this go-go environment with everyone that you kind of mentioned, just upping each other out on models. So it kind of feels that everyone is just racing towards AGI. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it so, like Mark Andreessen said, that AGI is here, but it's not evenly distributed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is what I get to at the end of my book. I'm trying to, in a way, portray Demis Hassabis, this 21st century figure who has his hands on the 21st century version of the nuclear material, and explain what does it feel like to be creating this dangerous technology. And, it's got a lot of upsides, of course, but it is dangerous at the same time. And I think what I end up showing through Demis's words to me in the pub is that it doesn't feel great, right? On the one hand, Demis is succeeding beyond his wildest dreams in terms of actually building the technology. So scientifically, this is a huge success. But if you ask kind of existentially and in terms of the safety guardrails around it, because of the race dynamic that you refer to, it's very hard for the leader of one lab to control how AI gets rolled out. And so there is this paradox that Demis is both a success in building Gemini and a failure in controlling how Gemini is going to be used, contrary to what he set out at the beginning. So in some sense, the question in my book is, he's a good person with good intentions, but can he be good in his results? Can you be a great person and also have good effects in the world? These are sort of deep, subtle questions, which I think my book is a portrait of. And in some sense, because we are in this mad race, where everybody's got a new model every week, and it's just incredibly hard to keep track of what the heck is going on here, I think in a way stepping back and understanding where we are through the story of how we got here, the making of modern AI, told through the story of the most interesting protagonist in modern AI, I think this is sort of like an important piece of therapy for people, right? A lot of people told me this. I read your book and now I kind of feel more comfortable with where the world is going because at least I understand it. And in fact, Demis himself said that to me. He said that he was asked, I was on a platform with him in London, and somebody said, why did you spend more than 30 hours with this person who's writing a book about you? Didn't you have other stuff to do? And Demis's answer was, well, I didn't really mean to spend that much time with Sebastian, but, as we talked, it was quite helpful for me to sort of think about how I got to where I am and where I'm going to go next. And it's through that making sense of the path, of the journey, that we illuminate the path ahead.
Absolutely. I think like everyone listening and everyone watching should go and grab a copy. It kind of seems that you're the right person at the right time. It was like with the Power Law book. It is now with Superintelligence. Sebastian, thank you very much for taking the time. And it seems that probably also we're going to see each other in Turin in October. Can't wait
Fantastic.
to see you there.